What if China's most important ancient worlds were hidden not inside cities, but beneath mountains, deserts, and forgotten ruins? This is China's hidden ancient sites never meant to be found, where abandoned empires, sacred landscapes, and lost civilizations reveal a history far stranger than the one found in textbooks. In this episode, we journey from the silent Western Qing Tombs and the mist-covered peaks of Huangshan to Jiuzhaigou's sacred lakes, Sanxingdui's mysterious bronze faces, Tibet's vanished Guge Kingdom, cliffside Buddhist caves, desert monasteries, and a 4,000-year-old stone city that changed what we know about ancient China. Stay until the end. Subscribe and tell us which forgotten site deserves its own full documentary. Western Qing Tombs, Hebei. The Western Qing Tombs feel different from China's more celebrated imperial burial grounds because their broad avenues, arching roofs, and forested enclosures carry the silence of a dynasty already moving toward its end. The central story here is imperial decline, preserved in the resting place of 4 Qing emperors and members of their families whose monuments were designed for eternity, but now stand with a more abandoned and melancholy beauty. Stone guardians still line ceremonial roads, yet without the crowds and polished grandeur found elsewhere, they seem less like symbols of authority and more like witnesses waiting after the power they served has vanished. Weathered tiles, faded paint, closed courtyards, and vegetation entering the edges of formal design reveal how quickly nature begins to renegotiate spaces once protected by absolute command. The tombs were built to stabilize memory, but their quiet deterioration tells a different truth, showing that even rulers who controlled borders, armies, and court ritual could not control how future generations would remember them. Western Qing tombs become most powerful when viewed as the afterlife of empire itself, a landscape where grandeur remains visible, but certainty has already disappeared. Do these empty avenues feel peaceful to you, or do they feel like the moment after history has walked away? Mount Huangshan Anhou. Mount Huangshan is not only a mountain range of granite peaks, twisted pines, and moving cloud, but one of the landscapes through which Chinese culture learned how to imagine nature itself. The central story is artistic influence, because painters and poets repeatedly transformed its steep forms into a visual language of solitude, endurance, distance, and spiritual escape. When cloud fills the valleys, isolated summits appear like islands above a white sea, creating the layered depth later repeated in ink paintings where empty space becomes as meaningful as the mountains drawn around it. The pines growing from exposed rock contributed another enduring symbol, since their bent trunks and stubborn roots made survival look elegant rather than desperate. Artists did not simply copy this scenery, but used it to express an ideal world in which humans appear small, temporary, and capable of finding clarity only after leaving ordinary life below. Huangshan remains a source rather than a subject, a living landscape that continues to generate the same question found in centuries of Chinese art. How little must be shown for the imagination to see everything? Which would hold your attention longer here, the stone peaks or the empty space created by the clouds? Jiuzhaigou Valley, Sichuan. Jiuzhaigou is famous for lakes so clear and intensely colored that fallen trees remain visible beneath the surface. Yet, the valley's deeper meaning comes from the people who understood these waters as sacred long before they became photographs. The central story is spiritual landscape, shaped by Tibetan and Qiang communities whose beliefs connected lakes, forests, mountains, and waterfalls to protective forces, ancestral memory, and rules of respect. Minerals, depth, vegetation, and reflected light create changing shades of blue, green, and turquoise. But local tradition gives those colors a moral dimension by treating beauty as evidence of a living relationship rather than a resource without limits. Village, prayer flags, stories, and ritual practices place human life inside the valley instead of above it, suggesting that survival depends on recognizing boundaries that nature does not need to explain twice. Modern tourism brings the world closer to Jiuzhaigou while also testing the restraint that preserved it, making every boardwalk and crowded viewpoint part of a larger question about whether admiration can exist without possession. The valley's lakes become most powerful when seen as mirrors, in two senses, reflecting the mountains above, while also revealing how a culture chooses to behave before something it considers sacred. When you see water this clear, is your first instinct to enter it, photograph it, or simply remain still? Fahai Temple, Beijing. Fahai Temple hides one of Beijing's greatest artistic treasures inside a dark and relatively modest hall, where Ming Dynasty murals have preserved an astonishing world of movement, fabrique, expression, and sacred detail. The defining story is preservation through obscurity, because these paintings survived partly by remaining outside the brightest routes of imperial tourism and away from prolonged exposure to damaging light. Within the hall, Buddhist figures, guardians, Animals, clouds, jewelry, and flowing robes were painted with lines so controlled that even a small section can reveal the confidence of artists working at the highest level of their time. The darkness changes the experience, forcing the eye to slow down, as forms emerge gradually from the Yuden of seven, and Yudensi themselves immediately like images on a modern screen. That delay creates intimacy, as though the paintings were never intended to compete for attention, but to reward viewers willing to remain quiet long enough for the details to return. Fahai Temple proves that a masterpiece does not need monumental scale to survive, because sometimes the safest place for beauty is a forgotten room where darkness becomes a form of protection. Would you prefer these murals brightly illuminated or protected in the shadows exactly as they are? Sanxingdui, Sichuan. When enormous bronze masks, towering figures, gold objects, and strangely exaggerated eyes emerged from the sacrificial pits at Sanxingdui. They disrupted the familiar visual story of ancient China almost overnight. The central story is historical surprise, because the discoveries revealed a highly developed Bronze Age culture in Sichuan, whose artistic language looked dramatically different from traditions long treated as the main line of early Chinese civilization. The faces are not realistic portraits, yet their projecting eyes, wide ears, rigid expressions, and impossible proportions suggest ritual meanings so specific that modern viewers can recognize their importance without fully understanding their message. Because many objects were deliberately broken, burned, and buried, the pits appear less like abandoned storage and more like the remains of ceremonies whose rules vanished with the society that performed them. Their strangeness does not require fantasies about visitors from another world, because the more challenging possibility is already extraordinary. Ancient China contained multiple centers of power and imagination that developed beside one another and did not all leave readable histories. Sanxingdui remains one of archaeology's most valuable corrections, reminding us that a civilization can appear complete on paper, while entire worlds still wait beneath the soil to prove the story was larger. Which Sanxingdui mystery should we explore next? The bronze masks, the ritual pits, or the civilization that left no clear explanation? Subscribe and leave your choice below. Guge Kingdom ruins, Tibet. The ruins of the Guge Kingdom rise from the barren cliffs of Western Tibet like the remains of a city that was deliberately erased from the surface of another planet. The central mystery here is disappearance, because a kingdom that once controlled important routes across the Himalayan region was abandoned by the late 17th century, leaving its palaces, monasteries, caves, and defensive walls without a living population. From the valley floor, the settlement appears almost impossible to reach, with chambers and corridors carved into steep earth formations that allowed rulers, monks, soldiers, and ordinary families to occupy different levels of the same fortified mountain. Hidden inside the ruins are Buddhist murals whose colors survived the dry climate, preserving scenes of sacred figures and ceremonial life long after the political world that created them had collapsed. The tunnels and cave rooms reveal that Guge was built not only to display power, but to survive isolation, invasion, and an environment where water, farmland, and safe access were always limited. Today, its empty stairways make the kingdom feel less like an archaeological site than a warning that even a civilization, protected by mountains, can disappear, while its painted gods continue watching from the darkness. What do you think ended Guge War? Isolation, or a secret history still buried beneath the cliffs? Kizil Caves, Xinjiang. The Kizil Caves appear along the desert cliffs near Kuka as a silent row of openings, but inside them survives evidence of a world where religions, languages, and artistic traditions cross thousands of miles. The defining story here is cultural exchange, because the murals were created along a major branch of the Silk Road where Buddhist monks, merchants, translators, and travelers carried ideas between India, Central Asia, and China. Human figures, celestial beings, decorative patterns, and narrative scenes reveal artistic influences that do not belong to one civilization alone, turning each cave into a visual record of people meeting across borders. Many paintings have been damaged or removed over time, yet the remaining fragments still show how artists adapted foreign styles into a local, sacred language understood by communities living at the edge of the desert. The caves functioned like a religious library without books, using color and image to teach Buddhist stories to visitors who may not have shared the same written language. Kizil, therefore, preserves one of the Silk Road's most important truths. Goods crossed the desert in caravans, but beliefs traveled even farther by changing shape every time they entered a new culture. Which mystery would you examine first here? The surviving murals, the missing paintings, or the travelers who carried these stories across Asia? Maijishan grotto es gansu. Maijishan rises from the landscape like a giant column of sandstone, with Buddhist caves and wooden walkways attached to its vertical face hundreds of feet above the ground. The central story is devotion overcoming height, because generations of builders carved sanctuaries into a mountain where even reaching the work surface required courage, balance, and extraordinary patience. Narrow stairways and platforms connect caves filled with statues created across many dynasties, allowing more than 16 centuries of Buddhist art to exist on different levels of the same cliff. The soft sandstone made carving possible, but also made the mountain vulnerable, forcing artisans to build, repair, and protect sacred images against erosion, earthquakes, and the constant pull of gravity. Moving along the exposed walkways creates the unsettling impression that the monastery is suspended between earth and sky, separating visitors physically from the ordinary world below. Maijishan endures because faith here was not expressed only through statues, but through the decision to place those statues where creating and reaching them would become an act of devotion in itself. Would you cross these cliffside walkways for the view, the history, or the chance to enter a sanctuary above the clouds? Subashi Buddhist Ruins, Xinjiang. The Subashi ruins stand in the dry landscape near Kuka like the remains of a city slowly dissolving back into the desert from which its walls were made. The defining story is erosion, because this once important Buddhist center was constructed largely from earth, leaving its monasteries, stupas, and defensive structures almost defenseless against centuries of wind and shifting sand. At its height, monks and travelers gathered here near the Silk Road, creating a religious community supported by routes that connected distant markets and cultures across Central Asia. When those routes changed and the community disappeared, the desert began removing the site layer by layer, softening towers, opening cracks, and reducing monumental walls to irregular silhouettes. Unlike stone ruins that resist time dramatically, Subashi seems to vanish quietly, making every remaining structure feel temporary and every visit part of a countdown. The site's power comes from watching history disappear in real time, reminding us that some ancient cities are not simply abandoned, but are still being consumed by the landscape every day. How much of this forgotten monastery do you think will remain for the next generation to see? Shimao archaeological site, Shaanxi. Shimao emerged from the hills of northern China as a vast, stone-walled city built more than 4,000 years ago, long before many scholars expected such an organized urban center to exist in this region. The central story is the unexpected birth of city life because its fortifications, gates, terraces, and internal divisions reveal a society capable of planning, controlling labor, and organizing power on a remarkable scale. Massive stone walls surrounded elevated zones that appear to have separated elite, ceremonial, defensive, and residential spaces, suggesting that social hierarchy had already become part of the city's physical design. Archaeological discoveries have also revealed ritual objects and evidence of violence, showing that the authority holding this community together may have depended on both spiritual belief and force. Shimao challenges the older idea that early Chinese civilization developed through one simple center, instead pointing toward multiple complex societies rising across different landscapes and following different paths. Its ruins do not merely add another ancient city to the map. They force us to redraw the map itself and reconsider how early power, urban life, and civilization emerged in northern China. Does Shimao reveal the beginning of a forgotten kingdom, or only the first chapter of an even older story, still underground?